they'll become a man. And so you just look at any animal, there's a grasshopper, and someday it will evolve to become a man. Like they're all evolving up to this advanced species, up to humans. Not saying man, because that's what they would have said in the 1880s. That's not at all what natural selection is. But people said that like there's an implied hierarchy of species, yes.
When some people use this belief for the lost cause.
That's a very good point, and you're jumping the gun, because you're exactly right. You're exactly right to what's coming. And that's why they have all these pictures of Darwin, as they showed him later on with the beard, as like a monkey, implying that people would say that Darwin said that monkeys evolved into humans. And they would say, I didn't evolve from some monkey, I'm a human. Well, no, you didn't, because humans are related, but their characteristics, their traits advance on one branch of that tree. But this is really important, this hierarchy of species. And it would be reinforced by this. There's a famous book about our anthropology called The March of Progress. It was done 100 years ago. It was huge, but it took this idea to the step that all of you have seen, haven't you? You've seen this chart, haven't you? Like the monkey up to a human, implying that's the march of evolution. And progress is a key word, meaning it's worse and getting better. And so everything is evolving into this perfect human. Now, of course, that's not at all what Darwin said. That's not what natural selection is. But this is going to have really pernicious or evil influence down the road. Because once you can say there's a hierarchy of species, why not a hierarchy of humans? So when you mentioned the lost cause, we're coming there. And so this really basic idea of boom, boom. And the March of Progress didn't think of it that way, but they started putting this progress. And so this is going to be a very popular meme to this day, because once you can say that, can't there be a hierarchy based upon wealth, upon sex, upon race? And doesn't this now give it scientific or science-y explanation for differences in class, the differences between men and women, and the differences by color of skin? Remember Calhoun tried to do that with a positive good theory? Remember he had those numbers for the number of deaf, dumb, blind, and idiots and insane? He tried to give it scientific explanation. Darwin seems to be doomed. Now I should add, Darwin was furious about this, but it's out of his hands now. And this is crucial down the road. And so that's where you get very, okay, I just thought this was funny, so I'll show you. The evolution of a stick man. I think that's very clever. But you've all seen those silly memes like this, right? And every sport always has this, have to and then play in their sport. It's really popular one with hockey, but I've seen it for every sport, every activity. And the same thing, hunched over, down to hunched over on the computer. But that's not at all the way it works. Yes. Let's see. A jackhammer. So, one more thing. The far side one, the early school by cavemen starting from the Jorgensens, which are amoebas. And then I also like this one when it talks about, okay, this was actually a little more natural selection like, but they're laughing at the primitive mammal and the dinosaurs who look so big and powerful. I like that one. It's snowing. I just think that's very clever. But by the way, this really does explain natural selection. This one here. I love the old Far Side from the 80s. This certainly is not stronger than a dinosaur, but they survived. So survival of the fittest has natural selection has nothing to do with like the strongest. It's which can survive. What are the only dinosaurs that survived? Birds! Birds are dinosaurs. And if you don't believe me, look at a pelican. That's a wild-looking creature. So that leads into social Darwinism. Herbert Spencer, an English gentleman, is the first one to come up with this. And this has been talked about before. Don't forget, they're not in a vacuum. They're coming up with these things. Spencer wrote this. Spencer too, this was the great era of facial hair. Sure, there's facial hair now, but no, I'm sorry, but you're not as cool as that. And he said natural selection, it was like survival of the fittest, the strongest. And could that be in society too? He's the one who coined the term survival of the fittest. It is pretty common that people believe that Darwin came up with that. No, he did not. He despised the term survival of the fittest. And therefore, if we have survival of the fittest, that means those on top, the fittest in the upper class, are supposed to be that way, meaning classes are natural. Remember the positive good theory? Calhoun said the same thing, but now it's got science behind it. And much more credible than his made-up numbers. Somebody's got to be on top. So it's very much like the positive good theory. So this is a way to justify levels. And why are people on the bottom? They're morally corrupt. There's something wrong with them. And why would we ever want to help them? Those immoral traits will be passed on. We want the immoral traits to die away like natural selection. Now, of course, there's corrupt practices by the wealthy, but it ignores that. That's natural. They're supposed to do that because they're on top. Guess who likes Spencer a lot? Well, sure, they might, but the ones who really liked him were the very wealthy, because that justified what they were doing. Yeah. And Spencer was even brought to the United States by some of the richest men in the United States. He was brought there by Carnegie. He was brought there by J. Fisk, Robert Gould, Cyrus Field, some of the richest people. He came in 1871 in New York City because he was like this patron saint for philosophy. Finally, we have a philosophy that justifies everything that we're just starting to do. This says it's good. We're supposed to be ruthless. We're supposed to do whatever it takes to get rich. That's natural. And they actually took him around New York City, treated him like a king. And he was from the old aristocracy. Spencer was not super rich. It was kind of old wealth, and they were in decline. And so they took him around, and he'd been very isolated in the countryside of England. And they took him to the poorest area of Manhattan, New York, called the Five Points. 5 roads ran to one spot, and it was kind of in a basin, so all the water ran down there. It's the swampiest area. So that's where the poorest people in New York could find a place to live. And it was a place of misery. People stacked on top of each other. 1 out of every 5 children were orphans, just roaming the streets. Sewage were in these open sloughs because they had no place it could go. It couldn't flow to the water. And Spencer went there and he was appalled. And those men who took him down there, I remember Jay Gould said, see, look how corrupt and awful these poor people were. And Spencer's like, no. I didn't mean we should treat humans like this, though. I was just trying to explain why some people are on top, some people are on the bottom. And how did the very rich feel about Spencer when he said that? Shut up! No, we don't want to feel guilty. And they sent him back to England right away. And they quit reading him. So Spencer came up with the idea of social Darwinism, but it would be another philosopher who would be more influential, who had no qualms. His name, jump right here, William Graham Sumner. And it would be personified after years of research in a book that's actually, can be very shocking to read, called Folkways. And Sumner, he had no qualms. And he looked at it like, yes, there are some people on top, some people on the bottom. Survival of the fittest. And survival of the fittest, it's the individual in the market, buying and selling goods, the job market, the wage market, the capitalist market, the stock market. It's the survival of the fittest in the market. And remember that I told you about the gospel of success and individual and Horatio Alger fit right into that. And the wealthy are superior because they're the ones who can best adapt to the market. They have superior traits. Therefore, it's telling capitalists, keep doing what you're doing. And that's what they wanted to hear. Now, you notice I keep saying traits. And traits are passed on. We don't want negative traits. We want the superior traits. And here's the big thing. That means that social hierarchy, a ranking of people was natural. And that's why that whole thing about a hierarchy of race or species is so important. Because if it's hierarchy of species, why would there be a hierarchy of humans? And so it would be using this fake science or sciencey idea of that is all of a sudden by the end of the century, they're talking 39 or 37 to 39 different races, all by hierarchy, based upon this, by Darwinism. By the way, how did Charles Darwin feel about this? Just furious. Humans make choices. We do not have to treat other humans like this. We're not talking about what happens because of environmental problems. We make decisions. And we're going to treat other humans like this? Yes. But here's why this is important. You can have whatever philosophy you want. But this will be used as an ideology to pick political leaders to make the rules in government. That's why this is important. It's not the philosophy. It's how it affects us to this day. And as you can see by these subtitles, hey, it worked. Yeah. Government intervention is futile because it goes against nature, especially help for the working class and especially for the poor. If you help them, it'll be a disaster. And so this now will justify rules that will favor the wealthy and not anything for those who work. It's your fault. You should have done something about it. I'm just checking to make sure it's still recording. Is this recording? Uh-oh. Just a second, everybody. Okay, it's recording. Okay. And because they don't want to reinforce negative traits. If you help the poor by providing them direct aid, like food and housing support, things like that, they will just waste it and they will never, ever learn how to work. And they'll have children, and those negative traits we pass on to their children, and those negative traits we pass on to them. And remember, this believes that being poor is a moral failing. And so if you're thinking about natural selection, we want to drive those traits out and only have the traits that will lead to the superior individual in the market. So we can't have negative traits. Can't pass on bad blood. Did you catch what I said? This is really crucial because not only talking about government just policy, this can become ideologies for an entire political movements and countries. Because we better have selective breeding. And this selective breeding is going to be called eugenics. And we can't let impure blood. And that could be from these lazy poor coming into our country and making, or in purifying our blood, or for that matter, people of different color of skin. And that's going to be called eugenics, and that's going to start in the United States. We must have pure American blood. What is the term for being anti-immigrant? This is, and put it next to it, this is intensely nativist. Very nativist. We must have American blood. So you can see this quickly spreading to other places in the world. Because can't you just imagine somebody saying we must keep not American blood, but like another country? Let me throw one out here. I'm just gonna say German. I don't know. I have ideas, you know, that spread to Germany. And it started here, in this very room. No, and that's what we took over. No, it started here, eugenics. Social Darwinism is going to be a big deal. And therefore, only government aid should go to the very wealthy, because they're meant to succeed. So we should reinforce that blood. If we reinforce them, they will have more children. If we reinforce poor, they will have more children and it will be degenerate. And this is why it is the most dominant philosophy today. There are people who talk in this kind of language to this day. Now, you can agree or disagree. That's not the point. The point is, it's really important today, and it started here. So we're not talking about some isolated event in 1880 that might be a piece of trivia to know. No, this directly affects philosophy today. I repeat, it is the most dominant philosophy in the world today. Today. And therefore, it really does dictate how people live. And so that's laissez-faire. Does that fit right? Remember we talked about laissez-faire economics? And now they can say we have scientific reason to help the rich and not help anybody else. And doesn't it remind you a little bit of the positive good theory of slavery, where he said if we don't civilize the slaves, they will turn to vice and pauperism? It's the same argument, just now with a scientific little shield. Social Darwinism, wow, it's hard to find a philosophy that has had bigger effect in the world. It really is. And the guy who it's named after despised it with a passion that's hard to put into terms. So this fits right in a race, doesn't it? Now you have colored skin. It's no coincidence, along with everything else going on, that you're going to have mass colonization of Africa, where the European powers are going to scoop up Africa in the last 30 years. They colonize all but 2 places. Much of Asia will be colonized, including by the United States. The U.S. is going to get a massive colony and brutally conquered, called the Philippines. And brutally conquered. Why? Social Darwinism. That would be the justification. Now, let's be clear about it. They want money, you know. But social Darwinism will be the excuse. It's a big deal. I don't know where I got the dollar signs. I somehow found this, and now I can't remember how I did it. I thought the dollar signs were kind of clever. And now I can't, like, how did I do that? I did it like 5 years ago, and I can't remember. Yeah.
I mean, with insert symbols, so maybe do that.
But that's work. I don't want work. I'll have to come back to it. So that leads directly to the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth is Andrew Carnegie's idea. Carnegie, Scottish immigrant, Presbyterian, Calvinist predestination, was really worried about proving when going to heaven. And he likes social Darwinism, but there's kind of a guilt to it. How do you treat workers? How you treat society? How you treat competitors? He felt guilty. Oh, he didn't want to quit. I repeat, he did not want to quit. Someone gave me a cinnamon roll, and I got cinnamon on my grade sheet. It was really good. It was that cinnamon thing from the sunflower bakery. Now I'm hungry. Should we have a cinnamon roll day? Let's talk about it. Maybe after the exam. Let's do something. So, what he came up with is this concept. And this goes back to kind of a Puritan idea from the 17th century. Wealth is good. That's God's blessing. So whatever he does to get money is perfectly fine. So social Darwinism's fine. But this way he said, but what we do with our wealth is important. Now, let's be clear about it. He didn't have to give any of it away, but he said, no, you must prove that you are worthy of God's blessing by doing good works with it. What did that mean? Philanthropy. Now, philanthropy is not giving the money to charity. It's directed charity. Carnegie would decide who gets the money. And this fits in very well with social Darwinism. If he believes I'm on top because I am superior, why would I ever give money to another charity and let these underlings decide? I will decide where the money goes. So he didn't have to give anything away, but there is an element of social Darwinism. So you have to make your own choice about that. So he will decide who gets it and who doesn't get it. So most of the big, one thing about charity in the United States, a lot of it are philanthropists who want to decide where the money goes because they think they know. And we can say maybe they do, maybe they don't. Bill Gates, I will direct it to where it goes. Jeff Bezos is like that. He said he's going to give away $100 billion. He doesn't have to give away anything, but he will decide who's worth it. So there's an element of social Darwinism.
Most wealthy for tax write-offs. It was
Oh.
kind of the same system back then. Massive tax write-off.
There wasn't that system yet, but that will be a way, yes. And they do give, and most wealthy people give very little to charity. But it is for tax. Actually, middle class and working class people get a significantly larger percentage of their income. But since wealthy have more money, let's see. There is a tax write-off. And so, I got to do my taxes. my taxes. I do them. And I got it right. Next week. Next week, I'll sit down and do my taxes. And I'll charge myself. Okay. But who doesn't get the A? This is a direct quote from him. Sloth. I have trouble saying this. Slothful. What's somebody who's slothful? Yeah, lazy. And so, this fits in with social Darwinism a lot, doesn't it? You're poor, so you must be drunk. He did not believe in giving direct aid, like money, but whatever it might be, higher wages to workers. But he would provide money for libraries. Carnegie Endowment for Libraries would give hundreds of millions of dollars to this day. The Lewis and Clark County Library got its seed money from a Carnegie Endowment. When I was a little kid and growing up in Miles City, the public library was called the Carnegie Library. So he gave them all over the country. And he certainly didn't have to do that, and libraries are fantastic. But he also, for example, after he destroyed the labor union that cut their wages at Homestead in 1890, broke that union, he didn't want to give them higher wages. He actually cut their pay. But then he built them an opera house. That would be his philanthropy. So they could go send their kids to the opera. Yeah. Now, Carnegie Hall is in New York City, but he did even a bigger one in Pittsburgh. The one in Pittsburgh is one of the most beautiful opera houses in the world. Now, he didn't have to do any of that. But the idea was, well, your children, I'm not going to help them out with food or your parents with a day off. But I'll let them culturally improve themselves, so maybe someday they could come up to my level. So there's elements of that. So philanthropy has kind of it's a two-sided coin. Next, this beautiful valley also shows how so I have my screen, I have two screens, and sometimes a mouse flies over to the other screen, and I shut off like the camera, or what I did last period, I shut off the recording by accident somehow. Just by pure random fact, or pure random fate, that button was just right where it shut off the recording. This is when I need to shut off this. So, that's gospel of wealth. Now, before we get to anything else, I got to tell you one thing. Monday, you have your assignment due, and I'll give you time at the end of the class. But Monday, you might also have the most difficult test you've ever taken. Because if you don't follow it, I envy you, but I do follow the NFL, and it's the AFC Championship next Saturday. And I know a lot of you, if you don't care, good for you, but now you have to care. Because I've been a Kansas City Chief fan for about 54 years. 55 years maybe. That's the Chiefs from Super Bowl IV. And so even if you don't care, you got to care. They play an evil team called the Ravens. They're only evil. Actually, I kind of like them, but they're evil Sunday. And so you have to cheer for Kansas City, right? And I know it should mean nothing to you. And why should we all cheer for a corporation? I'm with you. I blame my parent. My father would like it and got me. So don't forget, you got to cheer for them, right? In victory? Good. All right, so moving on. So what are the opposing views to this? I'll give you time, but we're not quite to the thing yet. Opposing views. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why do we get to opposing views? Obviously, we show someone contributing to the delinquency of a dog, helping the dog smoke. I like that picture from 1895. Yeah, opposing to the, especially social Darwinism. Because gospel of wealth is kind of a form of social Darwinism, yeah.
Asking about this picture though, wasn't there a white belief that in a picture you shouldn't really smile because it was something for like your honor? However, when they start bringing it to other parts of the world, they start smiling in the pictures because it was joyous.
We're not going to talk about photographs, but there's something to that. So let's get to socialism. Socialism is one of the most important opposing views. And basically, socialism will come into its own and then be bitterly divided because of their hatred of social Darwinism. And they're saying classes are not natural. Socialists. So they are opposed to social Darwinism. You can tell someone's political point of view on their view towards social Darwinism. You know, we're all very complex people, and we have elements of all kinds of things. But your view on social Darwinism tells you a lot. Really tells you what kind of person you are, your political and ideological beliefs. And they believe in a classless society. Not everyone equal. We've talked about this before, but equal political, economic rights, and whatever that might mean. And socialists disagree on what that means. But classless. So we don't need the big gap between the rich and the poor, or the more radical ones, just one class, all workers. And once again, how would that function? They disagree. So the biggie, the workers control the means of production. Do you remember what the means of production, what the word for that is? Yeah, that's capital. How they control it could be stronger labor unions. It could be literally getting rid of the capitalists and taking over. It might also mean literally getting rid of the capitalists. Having camps for the capitalists to be re-educated. Which also kind of defeats the purpose of having ultimate democracy. But what they really were pushing for were workers' rights. That is why this is from the the Labour Party in Britain. 8-hour workday. That's a huge issue for workers then. Workers worked as long as they could either sun up to sundown or 12-hour shifts once they had electricity. And weekends fit into this, but actually the idea of leisure. And here's another one of all the different things, the right to vote, leisure, what we would call workers' comp. It's something they call employment liability. You know what workers' comp is if you've heard of workers' compensation. And another big thing they really pushed for is retirement benefits, because the idea of retirement did not exist to the Industrial Revolution. It just made no sense. Also, what do you do when you're too old to work and too young to die? What do you do? Remember I showed you those wealth? Remember the wealth by 1900, how little wealth was in the hands of most people? How do you prepare for retirement if you have no wealth and you can't work anymore? I mean, these are real issues. So that's what they push for, but also civil rights. If you're going to believe in a classless society, socialists believe that, therefore, we should have equal rights. And so it would be the socialists who would be the leaders in the fight for no discrimination based upon color of skin or based upon sex, male and female. They were socialists. And not all, others were elements of it, but they were leaders of it. But the big thing is they said this is the ultimate democracy. And democracy then would be women, workers' rights, civil rights, economic, political rights. Maybe a little arrow or something. That is their idea of democracy. So socialism, in their point of view, the ideology. And so what is a socialist? Well, a lot of their ideology, remember that strongly held belief comes from the Communist Manifesto. I've mentioned this once before. We got to get back to it. 1848. Because it's really going to become a big deal after the 1870s, 1880s, when the Industrial Revolution began to explode. And it's a little pamphlet. It's really easy to read. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote it. Marx was a journalist. Engels was a capitalist. Marx was from what is now Germany. Engels from England. And they wrote as a critique of capitalism. A critique of capitalism. And as they said, history, there's always been a struggle between the classes. But it's different now. Because instead of poor farmers fighting against their feudal knights, feudal noblemen, it's capitalists versus labor. Or capitalists, or the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, you might say. But we just go capitalists versus labor. But this is different now. All the labor is organized. And they can organize. And this is its critique. It was a critique of the wage system. Remember the wage system where workers are paid on supply and demand, and the profit goes to those who have the capital? And so they say, last week, capitalism exploits the workers for the wage system. And if you start having monopolies, it even exploits them more. Now, that is a very valid critique. And it is an issue that people have had to deal with. Even if you're a full 100% capitalist, you have to deal with this system. How do you deal with the wage system? Because you need people to buy your stuff. It's always, regardless of your point of view. But he said eventually they will not take it anymore. And there will be a revolution. It could be a violent revolution or one in the ballot box. And that is where you're going to get revolutionaries for years will carry this picture of Marx. The bearded Marx. Who has seen this picture before? I bet a lot of you have probably seen pictures like this or close. And Marx originally thought the capitalists will fight. Later on, he thought we can do it. I put down the ballot box, meaning vote for a new constitution, vote for labor unions. You can make those changes. It didn't have to be a violent revolution. But you can imagine some were like, of course it's going to be violent. And opponents to them are going to say, they want to cut your throats. And then, when the capitalist order is defeated, there'll be a dictatorship of the workers, called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And they will organize the society and get it ready for the perfect world. Do you see how it starts getting a little bit off the rails here? Because revolution potentially could be a civil war. We've had 2 civil wars. They were horrible. The Revolutionary War was a civil war, and the Civil War itself. And then a dictatorship? You're going to have people come in, you're going to be dictator, and then willingly give up power down the road? How often does that happen? And then a perfect socialist world, perfect democracy. And all the things that existed before, like the states, meaning countries, each of the states. Money as we know it, religion, organized religion as we know it would go away. As he said, religion was used to keep the hierarchy going. He didn't necessarily say he didn't say get rid of religion, but it would become different. But it's because of this that when the Soviet Union, and these guys really actually they believed in that idea of we're going to make this perfect socialist society, the Soviet Union. They believed it at first. That's why they got rid of religion. They thought, well, we won't have it anymore, so why have it? So they got rid of organized religion. And that is why it's going to become known as godless communism. And that is why in 1951, they added two words to the Pledge of Allegiance to show we're not godless communists. What did they add? Under God. That was added because of the Cold War and communism. The ironic thing was that the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a moderate socialist. Isn't the world weird? Just an interesting world, isn't it? So last few things then. Oh, so let's get to the other problem I told you about. So they created the dictatorship of the proletariat after a bloody, horrific civil war in Russia. It's hard to describe how bloody and awful this war was. 1918, 1919, 1920. They took over, the dictators. And when would they decide that the workers were ready, this country, for perfect democracy? Never. That's the problem. They kept power. And eventually they would turn into a monstrous totalitarian state. They had some of the tenets of socialism, but for the most part it's a monstrous state. Same thing happened in China. And now China has completely abandoned any tenets of socialism. They're just completely a monstrous totalitarian state. Wow, are they a monstrous state? They watch everybody, constantly, grade them, harass them, arrest them, spy on them. They're really good at spying on people, maybe even here. So that's what happened. So let's get the last couple things really quick before I let you work on that. So what we have is the left versus right thing. We have, I've mentioned left and right. We mentioned this on the before when I talked about the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. But also, I just have to show you a picture of Marx with a beard, and one time he shaved his beard off. And every time I looked at it, I'm like, wow, that's Marx? Where's the beard? I told you about the political spectrum, so let's make sure we got it. So we have on the right and on the left. We've all heard that. And this comes from the French Revolution. When they had the first National Assembly, those who were more for the king being in power, that means a hierarchy, they sat on the right. So that's right wing. The more liberties that people wanted all the way to equal rights for everybody, they sat on the left. Right, left. So socialists are more left. What is the most right? No, capitalists are more fascism. Fascism is the most right. And that's why if somebody's a little bit more to the left, they'll call you, you're a communist. And if someone's a little bit to the right, you're a fascist. Don't do that. Because people, I mean, but that's the most right. Or actually the most left is something else. But, and we'll get to it. Edmund Burke, during the French Revolution, was an English writer, and he was furious at getting rid of the old hierarchies, even though he was not part of the upper class. And we should preserve the hierarchies. And so he said, preserve? What's another word for preserve the old hierarchies? What's that? Conserve. So what came out of the right wing? What's the word? Conservative. And so that's why conservative would come to represent more on the right. Those on the left want more liberties. What came out of that? Now, people misuse those terms all the time. That's the roots. That's where they come from. Laissez-faire economics conserves the hierarchy of wealth. That's why we call it conservative. So that's where the terms come from. Now, my guess is you've heard this a lot, and so the words have lost a lot of their meaning. And I bet you have conservative and liberal elements. I mean, that's the way people are. And that's where you have to kind of weigh where you are. Oh, right or left, which one is most social Darwinism? Yeah. The more right you are, the more conservative you are, you're probably more social Darwinism. Even though we all have elements of that, I can't state that enough. There's no black and white. And so, on that happy note, good. So, everybody, the last person in each row, please go grab enough review books for everybody in your row. Please. You already have what someone needs to.
Oh, yes, I already have it.
It's actually a really good review book. Review books are pretty amazing. Go to page 378. Is that right? My memory's good? Yeah, 378. So there are three multiple. She already has one. So. 378. Now, let's look at that political cartoon on top. That's for question number 1. And so A, B, and C for question number 1. Those are the prompts or the questions for that political cartoon. Now, it's not so much identifying that, but for what you know. Oh, it has to be written in what? Pen. It has to be in pen. Blue or black, please. So if you look at that cartoon, it's actually a really good cartoon. Because it's not necessarily pro-immigration, but who do they allow in? And who's not allowed in?
Communists, socialists.
So they're allowing in the riffraff. But remember the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1884 kept out Chinese immigrants. And it's not so much the Chinese immigrant, but it's somebody who is industrialist or by order. Who do we let in? Make sense? So you basically pick for A what you will be doing a 3-sentence short ID that relates to it, relates to A. Then you do a 3-sentence for B and a 3-sentence for C. You pick questions 1, 2, or 3, so you can do one of them. So go and look through them all and pick one. I like one. I think that's a good one, but I like the other two all. Each of them I think would be good ones. No, you're doing all 3 parts in one. All 3 parts. So you're doing, yeah, you're doing all of question 1, all of question 2, or all of question 3. But so if you do question 1, that's a 3-sentence short ID for E, for A, for B, and C. Remember 3-sentence, so basically kind of give a little brief summary, give an example of it, and that means something you know. You have to relate it to something you know, and then how it addresses the problem. Give it back when you're done. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. It's a long time ago, it's like a minute. Yeah. We can read through what you're already know. If you need to go back, because this is just basic, that's like just read something. But you can use something.
So we're ready to read it.
Yeah. One for A, one for B. So you pick which. And keep, things you know, if you need to peek back and review of your notes, of course you can. But this is how they do upon the APUSH. What's basic? Yes and no. Well, and it's also allowing things. So it's allowing all this riffraff. Allowing bad immigrants, they're allowing bad ones in and not the good ones. So it's not totally one. You want to pick the good ones, not the good people and not the bad people. These industrials. Check and see if y'all get up. You can talk a little bit about that. The big thing you have to learn that both sides.
I love Darwinism and something else.
Immigrants from where they're from, where they come from. Think about how they're different. Does that make sense?
I know, like, how does it? You could also.
I don't know. You guys are outside of the
Wait, what was that caused by?
Sure. Yes. One for A, one for B. And they can of course relate, but it's got to be trying to get your examples from what you know. Cinnamon is the perfect sticky. You guys need more?
No.
Yes. Yeah.
I know.
Yes. All right.
He's sitting.
So we'll do this, and we'll next week we'll do another one, and we'll kind of. Very good question. I saw that face. And everything you have to do is never. Oh, you were holding that quid? And just... Did you hear the forecast might be as high as it Yeah, they just said this morning the forecast. Don't be unexpected. The forecast is for snow at the end of next week. This is looking. That's scary. I'm scared.
Is the summer gonna be like crazy?
If we don't get more snow this summer, it's gonna be hell. Literally.
Fire season is gonna be.
You mean smoke season? Okay. That's good. What's that? You're fine.
I don't have it.
Yeah. You get a bit?
I only wrote one.
You're fine. And we just have to get used to it.
Turn this in here, huh?
You're done?
Yes.
Oh, you don't have to, so print in there if you're not. Yeah, that's it. Maybe are you gonna have it dated? The word dated sometime now?
Yeah,
You got it. Very good. That works perfect. I like that you give specific examples happen in cities. Yeah, that works good. Oh, thanks. Yeah, that looks perfect. You're going to be the key. I give you kind of the generic way, first, second, third. I mean, if you want to put it in the third, that's fine. But you have to have those three elements. So if it might flow better with the example in the third, you can do that. You know what?
Do we still have to do these?
Well, you have to have some kind of like a summary of, kind of explain what you're talking about, an example, and then how it addresses the question.
Oh, how it addresses it.
Yeah.
Oh, I just knew what it left to. I didn't know. Because that's how we usually do it, so I was like.
All you have to do is just go back there and make sure what it led to it addresses that top.
Oh, okay. I said that more kind of example.
You should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the big thing. I mean, they're very similar to short IDs, but like the short IDs I give are very open-ended. This one's
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Okay. So it's just relating back to the questions.
Yeah, you should be fine.
Okay, perfect.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Yeah. That's a big one. 84. 18. What am I doing? Oh, we're going to watch the Twilight Zone special conference.
Did you turn off your recording?
Thank you. We're still recording.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.